literacy books and read them using technology and came up with the key words that are said around men and women. You will be probably not surprised to know that the top 2 words that were said around men were strong or unreliable, positive or negative. The top 2 words that were used to describe women in 3.5 million books were beautiful or barren. So this is not something that just is in education space, it's all around us. The concept of stereotyping, the concept of creating roles and limitations on people because of demographic factors, whether that's gender, whether that's sexual orientation, whether that's disability, whether that's race, is not a new thing. It's also not a new conversation to schools. In 2004, the National Union of Teachers was talking about the damage that gender stereotyping was doing to young people and how we should be doing something about it. What I'm going to do is take you through a whistle-stop tour of some of the stats behind it, some of the stats of what we're seeing at the moment, and then importantly, why does it happen, and what can we do, those small nudges that Joe was talking about, that we can all do individually to start chipping away at it. So let's start with some of the stats. In the world of child psychology, we talk about 8 is too late, because 90% of our development, of our sense of where we are in the world, of our sense of values, of our sense of what matters and what doesn't matter is formed before age 8. So really, when we're thinking about education, we also need to be thinking about what we call the third education, which is also home. And we know that with all the best will in the world, gender stereotypes are very strong at home. I don't know if you saw the study about 2 years ago, where they took 100 babies, they dressed them in either pink or blue, irrespective of their gender, and they then let adults go in and play with them. Sounds like a safeguarding nightmare, I promise you. But what they saw is 97% of the adults, even those people who love inclusion, even those people who are really woke in terms of what's going on in the world, they picked up a child dressed in blue, and they bounced it around and they told him how big and strong it was, and they picked up cars and they picked up toys, and they picked up babies dressed in pink, and they cuddled it in, and they told it how beautiful it was, and they told it how pretty, and they did all lovely, nurturing care, passive movements. And the reality is that we do that all of the time, even if it's unintentional. So by age 6, children will be able to tell you what's a girl's activity and what's a boy's activity, what's girls' clothes and what's boys' clothes. By age 7, children will set their aspirations based on what they believe they can or can't achieve based on a lot of demographic factors. Fast forward a bit, by age 9, girls start to drop out of sport far quicker than boys because of the gender stereotyping alongside some of the clothing and body consciousness issues that we start to see at that point. 1 in 6 under 19-year-olds at the moment has a body dysmorphia disorder. By that we mean an eating disorder or something that they are constantly anxious about their body around. That's girls and boys. In fact, eating disorders in boys are rising at a much more rapid rate than girls at the moment. Add on to that in the current CAMS system, the current mental health system, about 33% of young people wait at least 12 months before they're even seen for the first appointment. And you can imagine the damage that's being done to those young people. 25% of girls at the moment say that they want to work in IT or tech-based industry, compared with almost 50% of boys. And they say that partly because they look around and don't see girls in those spaces, or they see that because they believe there to be a cost to saying those things in terms of fitting in. Now, I'm sure some of us remember what it was like to be a young person. But the reality is, for a young person, the most important social driver between 14 and 21 or 22, depending on where your brain is developing, is fitting in. Being able to belong, being able to feel like you're part of something and people accept you. So when your kids come home and they say, you know, my friends didn't play with me today, they didn't invite me to something, so they went and sat with someone else, and as an adult you want to say, seriously, get over it, you won't remember them tomorrow. Know that for them it is the most important thing. Our brains cannot tell the difference between feeling excluded, and feeling is the most important word in that sentence. It doesn't matter whether you are or aren't excluded, it's about how you feel, and actually being physically attacked. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, and I was saying to the group earlier, I'll put together like an information pack to share. There's a study called Cyberball done by the University of California that attached teenagers to what they thought was a game. It was actually a piece of technology, and they thought they were playing with two other people, and they were passing a ball around on a computer screen. And they were wired up so we could see their neurological and physiological responses. All the time the ball was being passed around evenly, everyone was fine. But then the computer game changed the rules and started passing the ball just between the two avatars, leaving the person out. And what we saw in their response was every single threat response going on. So we're not able to physically tell the difference between, are we just being excluded from something, are we being, is there a barrier to something for us, or am I being physically attacked? So we're bringing up young people who are building a psychological platform that are being physically attacked every single day, and then we're wondering why they can't function well in society. But this isn't just about girls. Toxic masculinity, the things that we're bringing boys up to believe about themselves, boys don't cry, man up, boys have to be tough, boys have to perform this role in society, is just as damaging. In fact, at the moment, more damaging. 84 men take their life in the UK every single week. You are 3 times more likely to take your own life if you are a boy than if you are a girl. So this isn't just about protecting girls and pushing girls forward, it's about beginning to quell and silence those stereotypes, those boxes that we put people into. And this matters because we need people's talents more than ever at the moment. We're seeing real spikes in biases and stereotypes being hardwired into technology, into AI. And as we rely increasingly on AI, this becomes increasingly a problem. Let me give you some examples. You're 74% more likely to be injured in a car accident if you are a woman. Why? Because cars and safety equipment around cars are tested with crash test dummies that are 5'10" and male body shapes. So not only is the test of the crash set in that way, but also where all of the safety equipment is put is in line with what we would see in a male body. The current AI around skin cancer is 97% accurate, unless you're Asian, and then it's less than 80% accurate, because the technology and the coding that's going into that is designed to look for Caucasian skin colour changes. So we need young people to be inclusive. We need young people to be thinking differently. The World Economic Forum produces what we call essential skills gaps about 3 years ahead. And when you look at the skill gaps for 2022, the skills that our young people need to be really successful in the future are about complex problem solving, are about empathy, are about building trust and building relationships, are about being able to build new connections with things and see old problems through different lenses. And if we're not teaching young people to challenge stereotypes, to think differently, to see beyond the now, to poke stuff, to work out why has it always been done that, to challenge those myths and those assumptions that we've always had, then we're going to be in trouble. But the education system is not set up like that. The education system is set on a linear path with information. You go with no knowledge, you get tested in that knowledge, you get a certificate that says you've got that knowledge and you stop learning it. The world is not like that anymore. Think about your relationship with technology. You're not feeling so great, so you go online, you Google your symptoms. You look at one page, you don't like what that says, so you go into another page and you Google your symptoms on there and you get a different answer. It tells you one of the 7 things that you might have wrong, so you click on all of those links and you find the one that you like and decide that's what you've got, or you come out with you've got some terminal illness when you've actually got a sore throat. Our relationship with technology is evolving. It's not from one place or linear anymore, it's complex, and we need to teach our young people to think in a more complex way. So why does this happen? It happens not through intention. We all have subconscious stereotypes built into our thinking. We have 3 parts of our brain that you need to worry about. We've got the lizard part of your brain, the bit that does the breathing. You don't need to worry about that unless it's about to stop, in which case worry about it a lot. We've then got what we call the monkey part of our brain, the biggest part of our brain. It's where our subconscious is held. It's where our emotions are held. It's where our amygdala is held, which is our fight or flight, immediate response to something. And it's where our sense of lived experience is held. We've then got one other part of our brain which separates us out from most other species, which is our central cortex. It's our ability to stop and think. It's our ability to not react to something but respond to something, having weighed up a set of responses and chosen what we feel is the most appropriate one. But the thing about that central cortex is we don't switch it on very often, about 10% of the time. Think about those days that you get to work and you don't even know how you got there, if you're honest. You can't remember anything about the journey. Think about Halloween is a great example, as we're coming up to Halloween. You go to an event, you know someone is going to jump out at you, you know they're not really going to kill you, and yet as soon as they do, you jump and you scream and you respond accordingly. That's because when we're under pressure, when we're fast-paced, when we're not intentional in our thinking, that monkey part of our brain, our subconscious, is doing 90% of the work. So all of those stereotypes that we feed into young people when they're young follow through with us into our behaviours forevermore. So that's our thinking, but what does that do to our behaviours? Our brains love repetition, and they love doing the same thing time and time again. And we can think about doing something differently, and we might want to do something differently, and I've not met a teacher that isn't worried about the stereotypes that they're passing on, but that intention, that desire, doesn't translate to behaviours. Let me give you an example. Put both of your hands up in the air like this. I can only do one because of my hand. Put one thumb up in one hand. In your other hand, put your little finger out. And now all I want you to do is simply switch them over. Keep going.
Oh, my thumb was still up.
It's really hard, right? That shows you just how much our brains get caught into ruts of behaviour. And therefore, even though you want to change your behaviour, actually doing it is very difficult. Add on to that time pressure. Add on to that 15 other things to think about, and know how often we have an intention of changing our behaviour, but actually we just carry back on to what we've always done because it's easier and it's more comfortable. Also, from a point of inclusion, we are our worst combination. We leak how we feel, whether we think we do or don't. And we are like beacons picking up those messages. We call those messages micro-behaviours. They're either microaggressions that tell someone they're not safe, tell someone that's not a good thing to talk about, tell them that's not right and acceptable, or positive affirmations, things that tell people that they are safe and they're wanted and keep going and it's all good. We leak those all of the time. Is there anyone in this room who has not been at an event where no matter what people are saying to you, you just feel like you're not wanted? Has anyone been at those awful networking events where someone's chatting to you, but actually you know they're looking over your shoulder waiting for the more interesting people to come in? If they're in this room now, don't look at them. If you like. So we leak all of those things, but we're also, particularly when we're young people, we pick those signals up like beacons. Comes from the days when we needed to decide whether we were safe or not, but our brains haven't really developed since those days. So we give off unintentional reactions to things. So when your children say something to you, you're giving off a response, even if you think you're not. And that response is telling them, okay, this is good, keep going. Or it's telling them, no, that's not right, don't keep going with that conversation. And we don't explore that, we don't discuss it, they just pick up the signal that that's not right. And that's how stereotypes just continue to be reinforced. Again, the more we're under pressure, the more we're tired, the more we're hungry, the more we're not thinking, the more stronger that behaviour is. There's a great quote that says, if you don't mind when you've come home from work being sat down and interrogated about what your day was like, what you did, how it was, what your friends said, what you had for dinner, if you're okay with that, then ask your kids when they get home. And if you're not okay with that, then understand that that's a really hard thing for your kids too. Because when we're under pressure and we're tired and all of those things, our stereotype behaviour is high and our conscious behaviour is low. The other thing we do is make associations. I'm sure most of you have seen the video where they go into a primary school and they ask them to draw pictures of a firefighter and an astronaut, and they draw pictures of boys. What happens in those situations is when those things don't happen and we respond to them, we reinforce them. I am an inclusion warrior, but when I first took my son to nursery, and it was a male teacher, my instant reaction was, you can't have him. We can't stop these instant reactions in our brain, and we shouldn't be foolish enough to think we can, but we can stop our behaviour. My son is now 18, by the way, so if anyone wants him, you're more than welcome. So we've got all of these things going on. We've got stereotypes in our brain. We've got the reinforcing of stereotypes. Think about activities that children experience at school. Go into your child's school, or if you're a teacher or a parent governor or whatever you are, whatever you're interested in this, just look around. We're finding actually an increasing gender stereotype of materials for young people rather than decreasing. Lego is a great example. It's only been in the last 5 years that they've moved away from generic Lego to now Friends Lego for girls. Pink, and actually designed to evoke passive, caring, nurturing play as opposed to active play, and designed with less moving parts than boy Lego. You only need to look at clothes. We were having this conversation earlier about girls' clothes and boys' clothes. And not only is that wrong in terms of the attraction that young people have, and the stigma that young people have if you try to break those stereotypes and send them to school in something different, but alongside that understanding that by age 7, kids are very, very clear about what's girls and what's boys, and we haven't even got into the non-binary conversation yet, that we're creating an environment where young people are always wanting to stay in those stereotypes and therefore just get reinforced. But we don't see the things that aren't relevant to us. Because our brains take in about 400,000 pieces of information a minute, and we can process about 40. So everything else either goes into our subconscious, particularly if it reinforces what we already expect to see, or it gets filtered out and we don't see it. The Academy Awards was a shining example of that. And if you remember about 2 years ago, the Academy Awards, somebody highlighted that they hadn't nominated a black actor or actress for 10 years. I don't believe for 1 second that that was their intention. But they just made drip-fed decisions and they hadn't looked back to see what was the actions. And when you ask them, did you get the best actress and actresses, they genuinely believe they did, because we don't see what's outside of our sphere of relevance. And therefore we don't see the mistakes that we're making. Fast forward into the workplace. Why does this matter? Because we've all been through this, we've all experienced this, we've all survived in some way, shape or form. But the reality is 45% of adults are telling us that stereotypes have limited their life choices in one way, shape or form. 51% of women are telling us that they didn't go into the career they really wanted to, they went into the career they felt they should go into. That question hasn't been asked to men, but I suspect that's even stronger for men. When you think about how many men do you see in primary schools, how many men do you see in nursing, how many men do you see in those caring roles, I suspect that's not true of how many men really would want to be in those roles given pure choice. 53% of people have said that stereotyping and the reinforcing of those stereotypes from an early age have had a negative impact on family relationships and roles in the family. Just look at any single book, current children's book, and see how much it's the dad goes out to work, the mum stays at home and does the cooking. There was a study done about 3 years ago looking at adverts, and less than 5% of men were having physical contact with their children in adverts, whereas 80% of women in adverts were carrying out the nurturing, parental caring role. So this is all around us. So what can we do about it? We can do 4 very easy things. The first thing we can do is understand our own sphere of view and understand the stereotypes that we are perpetuating, whether we're a parent, whatever role that we're playing. There's a really cool test online, it's completely free, it's called the Harvard Implicit Bias Test. Know that test and it will tell you what your preferences are. It's really uncomfortable. It doesn't mean you're an IST. It just tells you what your natural preferences are, what's already in your stereotypes, what you naturally warm to and what you naturally find more uncomfortable. When I did it, I found out that I find ginger-haired people less positive, and I'm more drawn towards black men. As a gay woman, that's a big issue. But we're working on it. So find out what your biases are, because what that does... the Harvard Implicit Bias Test. I'll send the link round, but it's really easy to find. Once you know what your biases are, A, you know the situations you need to be doubly careful of, but B, as a parent, if you are a parent, or if you're in a position of influencing young people, you can just be a little bit more aware when those conversations come up of what that body language is doing. The second thing we can do is be really intentional in our exposure of young people to difference. I'm a wheelchair user because 10 years ago I had an accident. I woke up in hospital, was told I'd broken my back, and for about 3 months I wished that I was dead, because I grew up in that generation where we never spoke about disability. We saw a disabled person on the street and we walked past as quickly as we could and changed the subject as quickly as we could. So I grew up believing that disability was something not to be talked about, was something to be ashamed about. And the only image I had in my head was those, do you remember the Bernardo's begging boxes with the little girl with the calipers on? That was the only image I had in my head about what life with a disability is like. Think about your young people. Think about those young people who want to be something that's outside of the gender stereotype, who want to be something that they've never seen anybody like them doing before. And think about, are we enabling those conversations? Are we making active roles? And there's a great website called the Red Letterbox Library. And I don't know the library in Folkestone, so it could be brilliant. I'm not saying it's not. But online you'll find the Red Letterbox Library, very difficult to say. But they have brilliant resources of all kinds of different books and all kinds of different games and activities you can play with young people that break down stereotypes and help young people to see difference as something to be positive about rather than something to shy away about. The third thing we can do is expand our own knowledge. Because as adults, we don't like not knowing things. I have this conversation with teachers all the time. Teachers come from a profession where they are the expert. They're there to give knowledge to young people. The reality is the young people don't live in the same world that they do anymore, and that's a difficult place for teachers. But teachers shy away from conversations that they don't feel comfortable being the expert in. That's kind of human nature for all of us. So we can take ownership of our own knowledge. Take those subjects that you really feel uncomfortable about, that you really think you don't know anything about, that you really get kind of nervous about when the conversation starts, and own that journey of expanding your knowledge. Whether it's online, whether it's using a network like this and finding someone that has that knowledge and sharing it with each other, or whether it's sitting down with a young person and learning together, whatever works for you, but take ownership of your own knowledge. The third thing we can do is be a critical friend to schools. Schools are busy places, and with all the will in the world, whilst this is somewhere on their agenda, and it's definitely somewhere on their aspirational agenda, and it's definitely beginning to show its face in terms of Ofsted and those kind of requirements, and it's beginning to have a shape. Unfortunately, my candid view is you're not going to see that for about 10 years, because whilst the Ofsted regulations talk about how important inclusion and empathy and celebrating difference is, the Ofsted inspectors, who are all about 554 and don't really get any of this and have received no training in any of this, we know that they're not actually bringing that conversation to the table at all. So you can be the critical friend to schools, and by critical friends I mean calling in that behaviour. We talk a lot about calling out bad behaviour. For me, that's just perpetuating the problem. You're telling people what they're doing wrong, but you're not telling them what they could do better. So offer to be part of the solution. Offer to have a look around the walls, do an audit, have a look at the correspondence that schools are sending, have a look at their perspective, have a look at their website. Not with a view of telling them how awful it is, but telling them where positive changes could be made and how to make it easy for them. Remembering that 90% of this stuff is not intentional. Thankfully gone mostly are the days where people are intentionally exclusive. Nowadays we're just unintentionally sloppy. And then the last thing we can do is really, really talk about it. Have really constructive conversations with young people about the inequality that they see. The inequality that perhaps they don't see, but we should be starting to understand. Why can girls not play football? Do we really believe that? How could we go about challenging that and helping them to build the tools to recognise those biases and then challenge them in a positive, constructive way? Of course, that's so much easier to say than it is to do, but by beginning to give them those tools, by beginning to give them the safe space to have these uncomfortable conversations and start to find solutions, then we can start to see the change from within. I hope that's been helpful. It's a lot of information, I appreciate, but hopefully it's been starting the conversation up.